good weekend. Labor Day weekend here in Canada. It's always nice to go into an international break with a victory. And Aston Villa did it at a place where they would have been demanding of themselves to go and get 3 points. But how did they do it? And what's behind this incredible turnaround in relationship with Jhon Duran? And now that the transfer window is closed, is Aston Villa better off, the same as, or worse than last year's squad? All issues I shall explore as the Holy Trinity Show reviews Leicester 1, Aston Villa 2. Before we get into the match, how about the draw? I mean, this is the stuff that fans and players dream about. I get butterflies just thinking about the fact that Aston Villa will be playing on the hallowed grounds of Adams Park, home of Wycombe Wanderers. I mean, it's surreal, really. And then you have, the Champions League. And as I'm watching this draw unfold, I'm thinking to myself, how does this get any better for us? Because we have 4 very compelling and enticing matchups at Villa Park, both from a commercial and a competitive standpoint. I think our toughest tests will come against the 2 German teams, and we happen to get Bayern Munich at home. We have the Douglas Luiz derby with Juventus. I watched them on Sunday. They didn't intimidate me. The Samuel Illing Jr. derby with Bologna, and then a crackling visit by Celtic. And I'm now starting to think that under the watchful guidance of our European commander, who's navigated these waters many times before, I think we're going to hold our own. Now, as far as the away 4 games are concerned, obviously our biggest test will come from RB Leipzig because they're a legitimate Bundesliga title hopeful this year. They've done a lot of good business, including Herr Trauder, which apparently they hijacked from us on transfer deadline day. We were supposedly linked with them. Played them in preseason. It got testy, so that's going to be one to circle. But no disrespect to the other 3 teams, we should not be intimidated by any of those fixtures. And maybe more importantly, from a travel logistics standpoint, those are not daunting travel itineraries. Accomplishing Champions League football last year really became tangible with this week's draw. Welcome officially to the Holy Trinity Show, presented by 24/7 Services, as we review the 3 key issues or moments that defined Leicester 1, Villa 2, the Mark Albrighton derby, which went Villa's way again. Congratulations on a great career, including a league title for Albrighton. Samir was on hand with his buddies Owen and Pat, a trio of correspondents roaming the King Power with cameras rolling. If you look at the key numbers without knowing the score, you would probably assume that Villa were winners despite the possession. We created the bigger chances, had more shots, had actually a very good shot to on-target ratio. We got into the better areas. But I was surprised by how many successful dribbles we completed. And this time, that wasn't driven by Morgan Rogers, who actually had a bit of a tough day, going only 1 of 4 dribble attempts. Jacob Ramsey led the way with 3 successful dribbles out of 3 attempts. Jacob Ramsey looked very lively again in this game and played a major role in the opening goal, which I'll talk about later. And this was all as a result of Leon Bailey going down with what looked like a hamstring injury. He really doesn't want to play for Steve McLaren and Jamaica in this window, does he? Anyway, a big question early for Unai Emery with no Philogene, so on comes Jacob Ramsey. John McGinn shifts over to the right-hand side, and to be honest, there was very little disruption. In fact, you could argue the team looked better after that point. In total, Ramsey played 63 minutes, which I think is probably more than the staff wanted, because it sure seems like they are nursing him back carefully in order to make sure that he is fit throughout the entire season. But JJ just looks so bright right now, and I know it's awkward when the substitute is substituted, but I think that had everything to do with the maximum amount of minutes they wanted him to play, and I am certain he will be starting imminently. These Adidas warm-up hoodies are legit. And I'm generally not a fan of anything white because it never looks as good as the day it comes out of the package. But I love the rubberized and textured black badges. And it seemed like all Adidas teams across the globe were busting these out over the weekend. Big-ish issue and moment. David Coote really is an awful referee. And I don't know what it is about him that makes him so unlikable. Maybe it's his resemblance to American actor Sam Rockwell, who has this tendency of playing very creepy, low-life-ish characters. But Coote made a very important intervention in this game around the 58th minute when we almost conceded the equalizer. It came after a very untidy passage of play where neither team could keep possession to save its life. And the Leicester fans are wondering, why didn't you just let play continue there? Because that might have been the 1-1 goal. Instead, 5 minutes later, it's 2-0. Big moment. Lamar Bogart making his Premier League debut for Aston Villa. What a huge shout from Unai Emery, throwing an untested young man into a very difficult challenge straight from the off. And in doing so, does he potentially put some thoughts into the mind of Kosta Nedeljkovic, who I thought didn't really put a foot wrong against Arsenal? And the incredible thing is that Bogart is 2 full years older than the Serbian. I didn't think Bogart was spectacular. I didn't think he was terrible, but he will have learned from that game. He survived. He'll get information, and that first one is now officially under his belt. Positive news. John McGinn's prostate is perfectly healthy, and although 29-year-olds don't usually have to worry about that kind of thing, and having the exam right then and there during the game was a little bit unorthodox. You know McGinn, he's the captain. He plays multiple positions. He likes to multitask and be efficient with his time, and he does tend to present his backside often in games. Big issue number 3, Watkins' woes. It's almost getting a little bit comical for poor Ollie Watkins these days, as he generated another 2 big chances, which he could not convert. That first one, lovely through ball. It just seemed like from the very beginning of that move, though, he was somehow unbalanced. But the second one, did this not look like a situation that we've seen Watkins in before, maybe even recently? I mean, it's a good save, but if that's along the ground like it was against the Dutch, it's 1-0 there already. And then the other one was just bizarre. I mean, he creates his own chances because of the timing and the work rate of his forward running, and the goalkeeper really did get away with one there. But if you had told me a month ago that after 3 games, Ollie Watkins would still be looking for his first goal and Jhon Duran would have 2 game-winning goals, I would have laughed at you. But football is never predictable, which is why we love it. Big moment number 2, set piece perfection. That's the second time already this season that Amadou Onana has scored the opening goal away from home from a set piece. And what can you say? Austin McPhee pulled that one straight out of the laboratory, an avant-garde routine worthy of a chef's kiss. And I really honestly wonder, when you pull one off like that and score from it, do you just retire it right then and there, like tear it all up, throw it away and say that's it, we're never doing that one again? I'll be talking about Youri Tielemans in more specific detail a little bit later, and his role in this goal is paramount. I mean, you cannot score this goal without that pinpoint ball being played at the perfect moment. But what is incredible to me when you think about this, okay, you're working on this routine at Bodymoor Heath. Are you doing it unopposed, like with mannequins? Are you using opponents who don't know what you're going to do? Or do they know the routine defensively? Because trying to replicate the timing of this in training versus a real game, it's a massive difference. So the pinpoint ball was perfect, but what happened after, in my opinion, was even better. This goal comes down to Jacob Ramsey's first touch. Think about it. He's in full flight and off and running when the ball is pinged into him. It's not a slow roller. It's driven almost into him. And with the outside of his boot, he not just cushions the ball, but he drags it along with him to penetrate the box into that area where all the great teams are attacking now. Because when you cut it back from there, it is utter chaos, and it is inviting players like Amadou Onana to come crashing in on it. In total, Ramsey played 63 minutes, which I think is probably more than the staff wanted, because it sure seems like they are nursing him back carefully in order to make sure that he is fit throughout the entire season. But JJ just looks so bright right now, and I know it's awkward when the substitute is substituted, but I think that had everything to do with the maximum amount of minutes they wanted him to play, and I am certain he will be starting imminently. And Onana came within a whisker of scoring at home via a wicked deflection. This is not what I expected from our record signing. And when you start your tenure with your new club with this level of success already, you have to feel like you made the right decision and that you have this sense of invincibility like it was all meant to be. Not to mention, he's totally embraced the role, his teammates in 6 languages that he speaks. He's ingratiated himself beautifully with the fans, speaks so eloquently, and he's just turned 23 years of age. What if Weston McKennie had come to Aston Villa in the Douglas Luiz dealings? Would we still have gone after Onana? We'll never know. This show is presented by 24/7 Services, and like Unai Emery, its managing director, Paul Handsaker, is very good and takes a lot of pride in recruitment. Now, he's not poring over video to see whether someone can properly install a roof or apply a new roofing product, even though they do training for that and have to be certified all the time. Paul understands and can spot talent and whether a person will fit into his team. Now, they don't have to be a Villa fan, but it makes the workday so much more enjoyable when they are. It's a testament to Paul and the quality of work from his team that many big companies have contracted 24/7 Services to provide maintenance over a defined term. And one thing that Paul would love to get into is apartment maintenance with estate agents. So, for example, you own a building, a tenant moves out, 24/7 comes in, they paint, they repair, they buff things up, new tenant moves in. Or if you own a building, they come in, improve the quality of the flat, and therefore the estate agent can charge more rent. If you own a building or know somebody who does, may I suggest you use the phone numbers in the description of this video or just contact 24/7 via their spanky website. And the number one big moment that defined Leicester 1, Villa 2, Duran's dagger. This goal capped off a 23-pass move that started with Emi Martinez bowling the ball straight up the middle. And all 23 of those were not necessarily intended to be passes. A couple were like overhit crosses that Villa managed to recover and maintain. But my favorite pass out of all 23 of those was the one that Ross Barkley played first time between 2 opponents to get it wide left. Ross Barkley was so composed when coming on. In fact, both he and John McGinn exhibited something that I call nous, which is grizzled know-how, a steady set of hands on the wheel in what was, let's face it, a very combative, chaotic at times, uneven, untidy type game. And he just slowed things down. And there's going to be times this season where we need to either see a game out or chase a game. Barkley can offer something in both those circumstances. Before we get into the final and brilliant last action of this goal, I'm going to make some assumptions about Villa's hierarchy and what everybody does within it. And what I'm basically going to do here is give a big shout out to the quietly integral Damian Vidagani. Monchi is responsible for bringing players in and moving them on, so his energy is spent towards scouts, agents, and fellow sporting directors. Obviously, Unai Emery is the coach. It's his job to prepare the squad for every upcoming fixture. If I've read this correctly, I think Damian Vidagani is responsible for virtually everything else, including sticky situations internally, shielding Emery and Monchi from problems, acting as a mediator at times. Perhaps we can even call him the cleaner. I don't profess to have any inside knowledge whatsoever, except for the fact I do know, as most of us do, that a couple of weeks ago there was a come to Jesus meeting between Villa and the Duran camp, and I'm almost 100% positive that Vidagani would have attended that meeting on the club's behalf. In fact, he might have been the only one to do so. And that's because bridges were burning and the fires needed to be put out. Duran wanted to move on. Villa were happy to oblige if their valuation was met. And at some point, the Duran camp had to realize that Duran's behavioral reputation was actually impacting his ability to leave. Here's how I think the conversation went between Vidagani and Duran's camp. Everything that has happened between us in the past is now forgotten. It's been forgotten by the club. It will be forgotten by you. It is a completely blank slate. And on Monday, you'll show up at Bodymore Heath with a smile on your face, feeling positive and ready to work your backside off, as if it's your first ever day at Aston Villa Football Club. Because now I see a player who's smiling on the field, off the field, and behind the scenes. It seems like he has support and camaraderie with players close to him in age like Rodgers and Onana. He's moved out of his downtown apartment, which happened to be the manager's building, and into a quieter, more suburban setting. And in 3 games, he has 2 game-winning goals and looks every penny worth of the $40 million valuation that Aston Villa slapped on him in the summer. And he's still only 20. Our club has matured so drastically over the last couple of seasons because we're being run by adults now. Imagine if we had compromised and just accepted any old stink bid from another club just to get rid of the problem. We don't need the hassle. We don't need the distraction. You heard John McGinn's comments after the Liverpool game last year. He utterly destroyed Duran during 3 separate interviews. But no, not this Villa, not now. They rolled up their sleeves, looked for a solution to compromise, and now it seems like all parties have just hit the reset button. Duran may still end up moving on, but for now, everyone seems to be benefiting from whatever happened. This header is utterly amazing, and I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying this. This is the header of a $100 million striker, because Jhon Duran's God-given talent, and it always has been, is that at any given moment he knows exactly where the goal is, and he knows precisely where the goalkeeper is situated in that goal. So while Luca Dean's perfect cross is in the air, he already knows the precise technique he needs to use to score. This was not a powerful forehead straight to the button type header, even though we know Duran could probably provide those. This was a subtle, nuanced, glancing header, the only technique he could have used in order to float the ball over the desperately outstretched fingertips of the goalkeeper. I mean, the timing of how he torqued his neck muscles, even though the ball was slightly behind him, the location of the contact point on his head, it was perfect. So that's 3 games, 2 game-winning goals, totally different ones, and a player who looks like he's gotten over the indignity of not being a starter in this team. In fact, he might be coming to the conclusion that coming on late against tired minds and legs is actually benefiting him. The Sill Hill Brewery star performer was, in my mind, without question, Youri Tielemans, in the Youri Tielemans derby, no less. His stats were amazing. He was integral in the opening goal. I'm presenting Youri with the wow. And you'd almost think that this zesty IPA was Belgian-inspired because the Belgians do not f*** around with their beers. Exquisite, crisp, balanced, just like Youri's game. I mean, on one hand, he's winning 6 of 8 ground duels. Then he's completing 84% of his passes, including 8 into the final third. Wow, indeed. You can enjoy this zesty IPA responsibly in the Sill Hill Brewery taproom in Aston, not a 25-minute walk from Villa Park, maybe before the Everton game. And when you're there, check the price per pour. You will find you're getting quality for value. The transfer window slammed shut on Friday, leading to the annual tradition of supporters moaning and complaining about the business their club did or did not conclude during that time. And many Villa fans were saying that the Douglas Luiz sale was an absolute travesty to our squad. I happen to believe that that sale was planned for quite some time as part of PSR compliance, and yes, the hierarchy would have obviously considered a multitude of names in terms of trying to generate some revenue to be compliant. And one of the big considerations in that process would have been, do we have another player that is similar in profile to Douglas Luiz? And in our case, that's Youri Tielemans. I mean, similar stature, right-footed, set-piece specialists, crafty, short ball, long ball. Unai Emery doesn't want a similar two players in his team. He wants a variety of ingredients in his squad. And after 3 games, I think Youri Tielemans has taken the mantle and really run with it. Also very interesting, a lot of Villa fans saying Douglas Luiz was our best player. And yet, he has not started in any of the 3 Serie A games so far. He came on late against Roma, thought he was excellent, shocked that they'd spend that much for a player and not start him, but surely he is going to start and get locked into that team eventually. So Villa went out and addressed what I thought was a glaring need within their squad, and frankly, it's something that every team wants to have, a big physical presence in the middle of the park. They paid a record fee. And it's not a like for like, but never would I have expected that after 3 games, Amadou Onana would have 2 goals. Well, Douglas Luiz had 6 total non-penalty goals last year. Onana is a third of the way to that total after 3 games. Now, Moussa Diaby and his 6 goals will hopefully be replaced by Morgan Rogers, Jacob Ramsey, and ideally, Emi Buendia. I think there's something to be said about continuity and finding the right balance in terms of integrating new faces. Many teams bring in 5 or 6 big new players every year, which of course is what the fans want every single year. But could you see how that might be disruptive from an integration standpoint? I mean, we've got a solid structure and core of players who understand the system and Unai Emery's way, and our new boys, Maatsen and Onana, have integrated so quickly. Philogene already understands what's going on, and Nedeljkovic is coming along, even though Unai Emery made mention of the fact that tactically he's still a little bit behind. Obviously, fans of those clubs outside the Sky Six are very frustrated by all this PSR stuff, which I think is corrupt. And the fact that the Premier League is changing the rules again for next year maybe validates the fact that even they are coming to the realization that these rules are bad for their business. But perhaps we should have paid a little bit more attention to the chase of potential sporting director Matteo Alemany. Remember him? We were trying to recruit him from Barcelona for the job that Monchi now has. He came to town, interviewed, and then suddenly decided to say no. Was that because he looked at our books and thought, well, I can't do anything with this mess? And he went back to Barcelona, where ironically they had even bigger problems than us. The fact is, Aston Villa was hamstrung by some really bad business done during the Steven Gerrard era, because back then, our only selling feature for our club was, you're going to play for a legend, Steven Gerrard, and we're going to pay you a boatload of money. Because think about it, Luca Dean, Boubacar Kamara, Diego Carlos, Leandro Dendoncker, Phil Coutinho, among the highest earners on our wage bill still, and with the exception of Kamara, all in advancing years with very little resale value. In fact, if you look at that list, really only Luca Dean and Kamara, maybe Diego Carlos, are legitimate starters. It was bad business. To quickly recap our subcategories, so nice to see that away record being a perfect 6 for 6. We actually committed more fouls in this game. Well, at least David Coote saw it that way, but another set-piece goal and another game where we scored first. We are way overdue for a clean sheet, though, and that is something I know Emery and company desperately want to change, and quickly. Not to potentially jinx it, even though I don't believe in jinxes. How great would it be, though, to actually influence the outcome of matches? I'd be like Ivan Toney betting on everything. Anyway, our next opponent might help us end the clean sheet drought. as the beleaguered and battered Toffees come to Villa Park. Oh, Everton with a 2-0 lead on Saturday at home, only to collapse like a cheap lawn chair to Bournemouth, losing the game 3-2. They're winless. They're shipping buckets of goals. They really didn't do a whole lot of business in the transfer window because they're in the same PSR situation as many teams. And maybe after all these seasons, I know they've had a lot of bad starts of late, and we've been talking about this, but maybe is this the year that Everton finally unveils its shiny new stadium down by the docks in the Championship? This is a fixture, Carabao Cup notwithstanding, that we have dominated in recent times, and it would have been very difficult for the Everton staff and their players to have to stew over that loss all through the international break. And it just makes you wonder if Ollie Watkins and his international teammate Jordan Pickford will have some friendly banter during that camp, and wouldn't it be something if Ollie Watkins finally broke his season-scoring seal against England's number one. The back-to-school routine is almost here, which is great for anyone over the age of about 22. And of course, now we have to hold our breath during this international window and make sure all the players involved come back healthy, as the football machine needs to keep churning that money out. And we can reflect on, during this time, 3 very credible performances while looking forward to a very busy spell ahead. We have Everton, we have Young Boys, we have Wolves, we have Ipswich away, and somewhere in there, round 3 of the Carabao Cup with Wycombe Wanderers. Next for this show, though, is an in-depth conversation with one of the all-time influential villains, Mr. Tony Morley. That's coming up shortly. Until then, be well, and as always, up the mighty Villa.